Yeah, that's a very interesting subject. So both men and women, they were wearing these tunics, but for women it was longer, so almost to their ankle, and men obviously wore shorter tunics, but even the slaves had tunics. So basically everybody could wear a tunic. The kids were also wearing the same type of tunic. They were usually made of cotton, linen, or wool. Men, however, had something called toga. That's probably what you have seen in the movies. Most of the movies, men wearing this very, very long, elaborated, long piece of fabric around them, and that's called toga. They wore it as an official clothing, so if it's more like a business suit nowadays, basically. But there was only men who were allowed to wear toga, and they had to wear it in any official meeting and gathering. Most of them were white, but high-rank people, emperor, could also wear purple colored toga. The reason for it is purple color was so expensive to make. It was made of some kind of shell, so it was very difficult and expensive process to do, and only high people with a high position could wear that. So women wore something called stola over their tunic if they were married, and stola was basically two pieces of rectangle fabric sewn together and buttoned together. It was very simple, just over the head and an opening for head and arms, and it could be held together with a belt, or it was cinched just under the breast. Over this stola, women also wore pulla, which is basically a shawl, very long, almost 11 feet, 5 feet in the width shawl. They wrapped themselves around with the pulla. Especially if it was cold outside, it would protect them from the wind and bad weather. But they covered their hair and their face when they went out if they didn't want to be disturbed. They could also wear it over their left shoulder and under their right arm. That's probably the most common way of wearing a pulla. Women were also wearing makeup back then. Makeup is mostly made by the oil and stones that they were crushing to powder, and with the oil it became like a cream. The slaves put the makeup on their masters, and the slave who knew how to put the makeup on the master's faces were very high demand. Roman usually wore eyeliner, and eyeshadow was very popular also, and rouge. They also had hair dye, so it was very popular to dye their hair with henna, like red color, and make the hair blonde, like bleaching. But they also wore lots of wigs. They had a very elaborate hair, and their status could be seen in how elaborate the hairstyle was. Women were also very fond of jewelries, and there were lots of jewelries. Younger women who were engaged, they got lots of jewelries from their fiancé, and they wore their jewelries before they would go out, so they can show that they were engaged. That was very popular. And men also wore jewelry, mostly ring, which was like a wax stamp. So if they want to wax seal a document, they had their ring and they just stamp it with their ring and wax seal, which was very interesting. They found lots of this type of ring, wax seal rings in Roman baths around the UK also, so that's how we know they did that. There are also in the museums around in UK.
Materfamilias from wealthier, more powerful families had more freedom than those with less money. They could own property and run their own businesses. They could hire slaves to do their housework. That way they had free time to study art and literature and to go out for entertainment. Women with little money generally worked in the family business and took care of their households.
What we have in this case is a collection of Roman jewellery, and mainly what we have are fibula, brooches. The Romans don't have buttons or zips, so they hold their clothes together with pins and brooches. And these, in this corner, these three particularly are quite striking. It's basically a safety pin. And it just holds clothes together. The interesting thing is they show the way that fashion changes. And so, for example, at the end of Roman Britain, the brooches that people are wearing and the belt buckles that people are wearing tells us a lot about who they are and where they have come from. In late Roman Britain, there are a lot of Germanic military brooches and belt buckles. But these are often found in contexts that are not military, which means that ordinary people are seeing these styles of decoration and copying them or wearing them themselves. One other thing I particularly love here are these key rings. They are rings that are also keys, so key rings and the little bangles. But mostly, as I say, the brooches we have here, it's basically a safety pin. That's the safety pin style. There is another kind of brooch which I can show you a copy of. I'll go and get it in a moment. Of the other style of Roman brooch, which is more like a pin, as opposed to a safety pin like these, where unlike a modern safety pin, if you like. But I'll get a copy of one now for you. This is called a penannular brooch. So this is a copy. It's not an original, okay, but it's the one that I wear. And just to show you how it goes on. Of course, now that I'm doing it in front of somebody, I've completely forgotten how to put it on. But it basically goes on like that, so that holds it. And then, see, here is my cloak. And if it's raining, I have my hood as well. So there we go. So this is the oldest form of belt brooch that you'll find. It's a standard form that goes right back before the Romans and is being used after. And it's a very simple, as I say, it's a very simple basic design. And it holds like that. Oops. And like that. And then it just pushes through, like so. Oops. There we go. It's because I'm doing it in front of somebody. It doesn't work now. There we are. And so that's how it looks.
Most of the clothing worn in ancient Rome was made of wool. Wool cloth was made throughout Italy. Less wealthy Romans might have woven cloth at home. In addition to wool, wealthier families might have had clothing made from Egyptian linen, Indian cotton, or Chinese silk. For a time, silk was so popular and so expensive that the Roman Senate worried that the silk trade would bankrupt Rome. The Romans imported a whole variety of materials: beef, corn, glassware, iron, lead, leather, marble, olive oil, perfumes, purple dye, silk, silver, spices, timber, tin and wine. Britain exported lead, woolen products and tin. In return, it imported from Rome wine, olive oil, pottery and papyrus. British traders relied on the Romans to provide security within the empire.
Roman pottery was produced in enormous quantities. It was used for cooking and as a tableware. Terra sigillata was of red color because it had a red glaze which was applied on the clay before firing. Then it was fired. It had signatures which was stamped in the bottom of the pot or dish. This pottery was having relief or was engraved. It wasn't painted. It was based on Greek pottery, but Greek pottery was completely different because Greek pottery was painted with different colors, and this was one color with one color and not painted. Besides tableware, there were also pots designed for cooking and food preparation, storage, transport and other purposes. Amphors were used during Roman times to transport food for a long and short distances. The content was generally liquid. It could be wine, olive oil, or garum, which was a popular fish sauce. These amphoras had a cylindrical body and long neck, and handles, which were very important. They were used for transporting for long distances in ship, and they used to have a spike bottom, so when the liquid was poured, could be handled with the handles and with the spike bottom to empty them. Once the amphora was completed, the interior was treated with resin to ensure that it's not leaking, because it was carrying liquid. Most expensive pottery tended to use relief decoration, usually molded rather than color. Fired clay or terracotta was also widely employed in the Roman period for architectural purposes, as for structural bricks or tiles. Also, it was used for lamps, as artificial lighting was commonplace in Roman, and candles were too expensive, made from beeswax or tallow. So the cheapest means of lighting was to use special clay produced lamps filled with oil. Italian styles exerted much less influence across the Europe in terracotta figurines and statues than in pottery vessels. Two manufactured materials were of great importance in Roman architecture, which was fired clay and concrete. These materials were used in buildings all over the Roman Empire and in many areas. They fell out of use again after the Roman period and only to be rediscovered centuries later.
The Romans never did succeed in subduing all of Britain. They always had to maintain a significant military presence to control the threat from the unconquered tribes. But most people in southern Britain settled down to Roman order and discipline. Towns appeared for the first time across the country, including York, Chester, St Albans, Bath, Lincoln, Gloucester, and Colchester. All of these major centres are still linked today by the system of Roman military roads radiating from the Great Port of London, such as Ermia Street, Walting Street, and the Fosse Way.
There are people who become Romanised at the time, so some of the Britons realise it's better to get on with them rather than to try and fight against them, because they haven't got the organisation the same as the Romans have. And it was a relatively short period of time that they were here, and then they got recalled back to Rome because they were having troubles in Rome itself and they needed all the troops back. So I think if you think of the towns, some of the big towns, you won't go that far wrong if you kind of think of how Rome is, metropolitan, sort of busy, so cities rather than here, we're, as I say, out in the countryside. So that, yeah, the houses would have been much grander than we're used to seeing. They would have had running water, which they'd put in. Got the slaves working for them. They would have dressed much better than the Britons did. They would have stayed with their togas, but again, there's evidence that they started to think about wearing trousers and things because it was so much colder here than in Rome.
Roads also allowed the distribution of Roman luxuries such as spices, wines, glass, etc., brought in from other regions of the empire. It is likely that the Romanization of Britain principally affected only the rich. This aristocracy may have increased status by adopting Roman ways and practices such as regular bathing. The vast majority of the populace would remain relatively untouched by Roman civilization, living off the land and eking out a living.
And so effectively, the tribes, they sort of merged and mingled with the tribes, the Celtic tribes, and became allied to them. And at one time they hadn't been allowed to marry or sort of have relations with the Celtic tribes, but that order was rescinded. I think it was under Hadrian that the order, Emperor Hadrian, that order was rescinded, so they could effectively marry into the Celtic tribes. So then you had the Romano-British evolving, and they were to build palaces. Villas, really, we would prefer to, and many of these are actually seen today. You find the mosaic flooring, like a fish guard. That's a place you can go to. You can see. But there's another one in Kent, quite close to where we have the lavender fields in Kent. As a Roman, mosaic. And St Albans, of course. St Albans used to be there's a lot of Roman remains there, and fantastic mosaics. So they're famous for their mosaics, of course, but the Romano-British would copy these as they're really taken from the Roman example when Roman generals were being controlled, but they're perhaps a little cruder, not quite so refined, but at any rate, the Romans.
After Rome left, the country fell into chaos. Native tribes and foreign invaders battled each other for power. Many of the Roman towns in Britain crumbled away as people went back to living in the countryside, but even after they were gone, the Romans left their mark all over the country. They gave us new towns, plants, animals, a new religion, and ways of reading and counting. Even the word Britain came from the Romans.